Hi everyone, welcome to channel Qtomation. Today we will see about another type of non-functional testing that is called as a security testing. Security testing is also a non-functional testing. So far we have seen performance testing as a part of non-functional testing, in which load testing is there, stress testing is there, and volume testing is there. We have also seen different type of functional testing as well. And now we are going to see about security testing. Security testing is also again a non-functional testing type. What exactly is security testing? It is a very critical aspect of non-functional testing that focuses on identifying vulnerabilities, threats, and risk in a software application to prevent malicious attacks, any data breach, and it ensures data integrity and confidentiality. So security testing is mainly done to check how secure our application is. There are different type of attacks which can happen on the software application. So security testing ensures that it is free from all those vulnerabilities, threats and risk in the software application. Unlike functional testing, which verifies what the system does, security testing ensures that the system's defense operate correctly under various conditions. So functional testing we have seen. In functional testing we basically verifies the functional behavior of the application. Whether the application is performing as per the requirement or not, that we verify during functional testing. In non-functional testing, that means in security testing, we mainly focus on system's defense mechanism. How the system behave, how the system secure under the various conditions. That we verify in the security testing. And security testing again is a very vast type of testing. In organizations, there is separate team dedicated to security testing because security testing needed special expertise and special skill is needed for security testing. And normally it is done by a dedicated team of security testers. So when we are doing a functional testing, as a functional tester, we have to focus on certain things, certain basic things about security testing like authentication and authorization related security testing. Now, what exactly is authentication and what is authorization? So we will see. So these are basically different type of security attacks which can happen on the software, and security testers will verify with different type of tools and techniques that our application is foolproof for this security type of attacks. Now that is done by a dedicated security testers. But as a functional tester, we can perform basic testing of security, for example authentication and authorization related testing. Now what is authentication? So both the terms sound similar, but there are differences between authentication and authorization. So basic difference between authentication and authorization is authentication means we are validating who is the user who is allowed to log in the application. We are just verifying on two parameters. Either user is valid, that means he is authenticated user, and if the user is not entering the correct credentials to log in the system, that means that user is not authenticated user. And what is authorization? Authorization means checking the permissions of that authenticated user. So once the user is authenticated, that authenticated user can log into the system. But what are the different actions that are allowed for that authenticated user comes under the authorization. That means that authenticated user can have certain permissions or certain actions which that user can perform on the application. If there are some limited actions which are very limited to some type of users, those actions should not be allowed for that authenticated user. that comes under the authorization part. So authorization means checking users' permission to access the data. So what is exactly the authentication? Authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user or system. Authentication verifies that the entity requesting the access is either valid or invalid. And the main purpose of authentication is to confirm the identity of a user, device or application. So in most of the website, wherever there is a login screen, we have to enter the valid credentials. If you put incorrect credentials, it will straight away show you the authentication error that your username or password is incorrect. That is basically authentication. So we are either allowing or not allowing to the users. So whenever we are testing the application, we should always verify that only authenticated users, means the users who are intended to log into the system, should be able to log into the system, and not the invalid users should be able to log in the system. So that is basically authentication testing. So if there are user credentials which are incorrect, those users should not be able to log into the system. We should restrict them. We should show them some message of authentication error. And for the users who are allowed, only those users should be able to log into the system. That comes under the authentication testing. What are the common authentication methods? Password based authentication. So in that, user will provide a username and a password. That is basically password based authentication. Multi-factor authentication. So multi-factor authentication means user will combine two or more independent credentials. It can be a password, it can be a SMS code, it can be a fingerprint. So any two authentications are needed for multi-factor authentication. It provides additional security on the top of normal authentication. Token based authentication. So it will use a digital token or certificate such as OAuth tokens, etc. Single sign-on. Single sign-on will allow the user to authenticate once and gain the access to multiple systems. So there can be a single sign-on also. That is also kind of a authentication where user will log into the one system and he can get access to multiple systems wherever he has the access. Simple example is logging into the computer with your username and password. That is a type of authentication. Using a fingerprint scanner to unlock the smartphone, that is also again one example of authentication. Entering a one-time code sent to your mobile device after providing a password, that is an example of multiple authentication. Multi-factor authentication we can consider it. So these are the different authentication techniques which we use. Now coming to the authorization. Authorization is the process of determining what is the authenticated user or system is allowed to do. So after authentication, so user can be authenticated, he can log into the system. But after logging into the system, what are the actions those are allowed to that type of user? Only those actions should be allowed to do for that user. That user should not be allowed to do actions other than those actions which are not permitted. It defines the permission and access levels granted to authenticated entity. And the main purpose of authorization is to ensure that authenticated user has the appropriate permissions to access resources and perform actions. So let's take an example of there are one application, and in that application there can be a three type of user roles. Some users can be a normal end users, some users can be admin users. Now the admin users will have higher permissions than end users. So whenever the any user with admin role log into the system, he should be able to access all the sections available in that application because he is an admin of that specific application. Whereas the end user means there can be a role of end user who will not have some section access for that role. So for such users, we should verify that they should not able to access the sections which are only allowed for admin users. So that is basically a simple testing of authorization. So every user role will have some sections, permissions, and we have to verify after login only those sections are visible to those roles of users. That comes under authorization testing. Now, what are the different authorization points? Role-based access control. So basically in role-based access control, it assigns the permission to users based on their role within the organization. So as I explained in the example, there can be an admin user, there can be a user role user, there can be a guest user. For admin users, almost all the section will be visible. For users, there would be lesser section will be available. And for the guest, it might be again lesser section compared to admin and users. So we have to verify by login with admin user, user role wala user, and guest user. After checking those user roles, we should verify that the sections which are assigned to that specific role permission, only those sections should be allowed to be displayed for that users. Another is access control list. So list that specify which user or system processes are granted access to objects and what operations are allowed. So it is not limited to sections only. There can be a specific type of actions. Those are restricted to specific controls. For example, only admin users can delete the user. Normal user cannot delete the end user. So that is again access control list. It is the action which is restricted to specific roles. Another examples will be a user logged into a system is allowed to read the files but not modify them. Right. So if there is a specific user role which is allowed to log into the system, but that user is not allowed to read the file is allowed but not modify them. So that specific user role can only read the files but not modify the files. So that we can verify using authorization testing. An admin can access and change all the settings in the application, while a regular user can only view certain settings. That is again control list related validation. So admin user can change all the setting in the application, while a regular user can only view the certain settings. That comes under the authorization part. Another example will be a customer service representative can view the customer data but cannot delete it. If he is allowed to delete or if he is able to delete that, that means it is a bug in our application. A customer service representative, if it is mentioned that he should not be able to delete the data, but if he is able to delete it, that means it is a system issue which we should ask the developer to resolve immediately. That we have to cover during authorization testing. So as a functional tester, we can do these basic checkpoints around our application, like authorization and authentication part. But for detailed security testing, for example, vulnerability testing, penetration testing, security scanning related testing, ethical hacking, risk assessment, security auditing, posture assessment, all the above type of different security testing related things are done by special expert who are in security testing domain. So in most of the organization, along with the functional tester, we also have security testing team, which mainly focuses on security testing related parts. So that is the importance of security testing in software. It is a non-functional testing. Thanks for watching this video. In the coming session, we will see about some more type of non-functional testing, that is compatibility testing, upgrade and installation testing, and recovery testing. So let's meet in our next video.